Okay, well, welcome. This is a bit of a bonus work session, and thank you all for being here. So we have a great panel, a lot of insight on this group. You have some of the best in the business here giving you some pieces. But how about those bowls? Really good, right? I went for chicken, I grabbed mushroom, I kept eating it. The mushroom is awesome. So if you didn't have mushroom, maybe there'll be some later. This session is really, this lunch and learn has always been, it's always felt like we need to give people a big lunch break, but there's also an area to really dig in and get into some meat of the business for those who really want a little bit extra. And we can always rely on some of our partners to show up for that. And I want to thank Wrapbook for putting this panel together and showing up to add this insight. I think the title says it all, Employment Compliance at Scale. We have so many issues in this business. We have small companies that do things stylistically. Many feel like that's the charm of being a small business. It separates you. But with that, there's also a rule book. And I think we've been learning more and more as the industry evolves that the rule book is important to understand compliance issues, especially when it comes to labor, especially when it comes to certain states that are west of us here. But really all over. Being compliant means being safe, means doing things well. We have a really unique relationship in this business with companies, employers, and their payroll companies that work hand in hand to make sure they're doing things right. So I'm delighted that our partners, Wrapbook, are here to present this really valuable piece of information. So Ali, I will leave it to you and your amazing panel.
Great. Come on down. Hi, everyone. As we're getting settled, if people want to scan a QR code, you have a chance to win AirPod 4. I actually don't know what the 4 does, but it should be better than the 3. You have to be here at the end to win the award. We'll call you out by name. So scan the QR code for your chance to win.
Are we included?
If you like Andrew, you can get in on it too.
I didn't bring my phone.
It gives me a lot of pleasure to introduce this wonderful panel. Anna, Director of Production at Anonymous, came up through production. So much about compliance is about the operational rigor. Chris from Tribeca and Missing Pieces, once formerly art department, now in finance, and behind the scenes, actually paying people is about cash flow. It's about so many of these back office operations. And then Andrew, who also came up through production, COO at SMUGGLER. Both Anna and Andrew are also a part of AICP West, and Andrew's the representative of AICP West to the national board. For me, this is a really important topic. We've been hearing about AI for the better part of the day, and AI is changing our jobs, our companies. The thing that doesn't change is compliance. And to underscore that, raise your hand if you know of a commercial production company, maybe it's the one you're at, maybe it's the one your friend's at, that has been sued over a wage and hour claim. Most of the audience, and I think that's the time that we live in today, whereby this isn't a nice to have thing. This is something that has really ripped through our industry that we are going to walk away with from today actionable advice on how to improve your compliance posture. And to start, I just want to hear from all of you of what is the actual problem? What's the challenge of being compliant? Chris, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
I'll kick it off. You need to pay people on time. I'll probably say it 10 times today, but we all work in-house. We're used to getting our paychecks on the 15th and 30th, 31st. People on set, they want to get paid too, so you need to set up a payment schedule. Like if we shoot on a Wednesday, you're going to get paid the following Friday. And you have to have that schedule published, and you need to also make sure that you're getting your time cards processed so you can actually hit those deadlines.
That sounds like such a simple thing. Get people paid out on time. What makes that hard?
I could speak to that. I mean, we're in an industry at this point where the work has gotten harder, jobs have become a lot more complicated, and then on top of it, in terms of compliance, which has always been a thing, the paperwork, there's multitudes of it, and there's a million different ways that you can get something wrong. And so having systems in place, like paying people on time, like guidelines, arbitration agreements, things like that, will help. But there's just so many micro things that you can constantly make a mistake on. And I think some of us, like, I've woken up in the middle of the night going like, oh, what did I forget? So.
There's so many things happening at once. Andrew, when you walk on set, like, what are the things that you're worried about with compliance?
Well, back in the day, I was the time card person. I was the production supervisor. I did all the payroll. I did it with a pencil. I did it with a calculator. I did it discreetly on my dining room table, whatever. It's a different era in a lot of ways, including just the production vibe. And people have become more sophisticated. Compliance and non-compliance issues have become more and more challenging. We live in a litigious society, and like I love to say, experience is the thing you have just after you needed it. And I work at a company that was sued. It was a massively, I don't even know what word to use, but it was very sort of emotionally catastrophic for me, because I felt like, what am I doing wrong? And then I comforted myself, reminded myself, we didn't create this business. It is what it is. We came up in it. We'll always want to get better. And to answer your question, when I go on set, the main thing that I think about is who is not going to conform to the systems that we actually have created, because they're a pain in the ass who doesn't want to submit their payroll data on time, or they don't want to do their onboarding on time. So that's the main thing for me. But in the last 2 years specifically, it's just taken on a life of its own. It's long overdue, like compliance enforcement, because none of these companies, I shouldn't say that. Most companies are not trying to pay people in a non-compliant way. They're just trying to get a job done, employ a bunch of people, and move the money as swiftly as possible.
We were talking a little bit behind the scenes. When was the first time each of you actually heard of a payroll schedule? You've been in production a long time. When did a payroll schedule become a thing?
3 or 4 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I always heard about it. We've seen, but the concept that you had to put it in front of an entire crew in order to be compliant was news to me when we got sued. And basically, we had, after we got sued, it was like Andrew, a little emotional, because it was kind of like, you think you're doing everything properly, you think you're in compliance, and then
and you're the director of production, and it's a production thing.
And then all of a sudden they're like, you did this wrong, you did this, everything was wrong. And part of it was, you were supposed to be putting a schedule in front of everybody and making sure that they acknowledged it and signed it. And if you're not doing that, then you're not compliant, and you can be sued. And that's why you're having to pay people. And so even when you're trying to do the right thing, I was told at one point that the law has now changed, but we were punished because we were paying people too early. We were paying people per paycheck, like weekly, and that at a certain point was non-compliant. So that's the difficulty in compliance, that sometimes also our industry isn't built like an office or a factory. And so oftentimes rules that might apply to other regulated industries don't apply to what we do, because we're on site or on stage or in another state than our headquartered. So it's a tricky, constantly evolving beast.
One of the things that I heard from both of you is when I got sued, it felt emotional. And maybe this is apparent, but who pays the price when you get sued? Is it the crew members? Is it the production person? Is it the company? Like, who's paying for a lawsuit?
Well, the owner of the company,
The company.
for one.
Company.
The
maybe.
company.
But downstream of that, it's very disincentivizing to produce projects in a state or in a country where it's as easy to be sued as it is. And I'm just, I learned a lot through this experience. And one of the things I learned in talking to the lawyer that defended, in my case, SMUGGLER in Division 7, was plaintiffs' attorneys draft legislation language for legislators so that they know where the bugaboos are. And that blew my mind, but I'd never thought about it before. So in wonderfully progressive states like the one I live in, workers' rights are very important to everyone. It's not about wanting to take advantage, it's just managing a company powered by amazing freelancers who bring it, and we couldn't do what we do without them. But it's not the same, as Anna said, as the factory or the office. That's the way these laws are written, and adapting them to our companies just takes extra effort.
And then just to go off of that in terms of just the money spent, I mean, does the crew benefit? That's like the $1 million question, right?
No.
Literally and figuratively. And the answer is no. I mean, I heard a story the other day about somebody who had to settle a lawsuit, and the settlement, and it was about wage an hour and all the other things that you could throw on a wall, but I think the settlement was about $20,000, but they spent $1.2 million in legal fees to work through it. And so when you contemplate that and the money that goes to different things, other entities, the attorneys, who's really benefiting from all of this?
I think this is one of the things. So there's a class action. The company is going to pay a ton of money to defend itself. And then crew maybe get a small, I've heard $20, I've heard some thousands of dollars split out among hundreds of people. Like, they get a small fraction. What actually leads to a class action? Like, what happens what is a class action?
Well, it could be anything as, I mean,
looking to you.
Chris started it. It could be one late payment, right? And I will say the AICP has done a ton of town halls and general meetings on this, but it's scary when you're sitting there and you're like, one late payment can lead to a $5,000 wage an hour suit that then builds into a class action, especially in a state, I'll just name California, where there's PAGA, there's all kinds of other things to be worried about, in which case something that if they had just made a complaint and you paid it out, it would have been a $5 correction plus maybe like $100, what's the word for it? Anyway, so something around $150 turns into $5,000, turns into 1.2 million in settlements for a class of and a group of people. And so that's, and again, it's like we try to do the right thing and it still leads to this. So then what can you do?
I think it's sometimes like as simple as you have a shoot right before a Christmas holiday and somebody doesn't approve a batch because they're out of town or whatever, and then one guy gets paid late and it dominoes.
I mean, you and I were talking about it the other day, in which you know, we say just pay people as soon as possible. Don't hold back batches because one person hasn't turned in their time card. And that's what we've been doing for years and years and years. And now there's a lot more focus on making sure procedurally that our teams are really, one, pushing it forward and telling me when something is holding up, because I'm happy to call that one crew member and be like, either turn it in or I'm just gonna pay you your guarantee. You know? So.
I was literally just telling a producer who didn't know this, like he had his batch held up and he was like waiting to fix one time card. And I was like, you gotta just pull that time card and get the batch through, because you don't wanna, luckily it wasn't in California, it was in another state, but it was like, all the states will eventually follow suit and it'll be the same. Like, you still wanna get people paid. So on kickoff meetings, I'll say, like, I don't care if there's 20 batches. The batches feed into our accounting software. It doesn't create any extra work for us. Just like get people paid, and the person who's a troublemaker, didn't do their I-9 or whatever, just pull that person out and pay them later.
So this is something I want to emphasize. The way a class action comes about is a lawyer finds one person where there's a mistake. They use that one person as a way to get a court to force the company to turn over all records and then find all of their other mistakes. And what's being discussed is the posture. I think, Anna, you called it build your armor, of reducing the risk of any corners. So we heard pay people on time, which was, hey, if there's one time card that's missing, get the rest of the batch, or one time card that there's a mistake on, get the rest of the batch out. What are other things that you all see as maybe there are problems, maybe there are ways to increase your armor? Like, what are the other things that you're paying attention to?
Can I respond to that? So many things. One of them is we adopted a across-the-board policy that everyone that works at our production company gets a stipend for the use of their cell phone. In California, that's called like a bring your own device thing, and if you use it for work or if you're expected to use it for work, you need to be compensated for it. And we just did this kind of set it and forget it rule that everyone gets paid, in my case, $2 a day. It could be $1, it could be $10, do whatever you want to do with your company. But before that, there was this like, well, who gets a kit rental? And who do we reimburse? And there was like all this over-analysis. And given this environment and what we've learned through the compliance trauma of getting sued, things like that, really strong onboarding, which is easier now than it's ever been. Like, it used to be like a stack of papers and you'd have people sign things at the end of a one-week job, and now you can onboard them in advance and collect the documents. You only have to think about it and explore it for about 1 minute to realize the treasure trove of easier compliance you can enjoy is a weird word, but it's a lot better than getting sued. And also it's become normalized now. So can I tell the anecdote really quickly about a couple weeks ago? I was on set in LA, just like left the office to go visit someone, and I always look at the call sheet because I used to work on the jobs and I'm friends with a lot of the crew. So I was talking to someone, and then the production supervisor came over and something about payroll, and I said, by the way, are people putting in their data on time? And this one name came up, and I said, bring that person over here. And they were a driver of a van, and I didn't know this person, but I thought I would make it funny, but also tell him he better put his shit in. And a crowd sort of gathered to see how I was gonna handle it. And I just walked in, I'm like, why are you a pain in my ass? How come you don't wanna do your stuff on time? He's like, no. So we had this like funny exchange. And I said, all right, we'll do it at the end of the day. And then because I'm me, the next day I actually remembered and followed up and found out that fucker still hadn't done it. And so I just sent an email to the department head and the fucker and the production manager. And I was like, you know what? No, like, tell your friends that I have no interest in employing people who won't even participate in the systems that we've set up. And part of what we were talking about is when you're the employer, you get to tell someone what to do and how to do it. That's what happens to me. That's what happens to the people that you manage, so.
And then just to go back, again, one non-compliance issue and a lawyer finding that person to sue you and then pulling that class, now the person that you were pushing to do their paperwork, we want to pay you, like, please fill out your paperwork, they're also now part of the suit. They're also now going to get part of the settlement, $60 or whatever it is, but you just spent $1 million fighting it. Yeah, and so that's the tricky thing. And when we talk about building your armor, like the things that we hired a consultant after we got sued the first time to kind of look at our systems from an objective point of view. Because again, I was like, oh, we did it so well, and we didn't. So they came in and they looked at our systems, and they basically explained, along with our lawyers, what they are looking for, what these lawyers are looking for is an easy target. And so if you have guidelines, if you have pay schedules, if you put it in front of people, you have a specific system of onboarding, you're not an easy target. They're going to look at your paperwork, see that you have signed arbitration agreements, and every crew member acknowledging. And I mean, one of the things that we do is as soon as somebody is booked, they're onboarded. It doesn't matter if they're going to start a week later, they're onboarded right away, because we want to make sure that there is enough time for them to fill out their paperwork, that we can keep pinging them in the platform to be like, hey, you haven't filled out your paperwork yet. I mean, 2 weeks ago, we just found out about this new I-9 compliance issue of errors, right? Not to open up another can of worms on that, but even those kind of things, like now, the more you build your armor, just the weaker a chance of somebody kind of coming in and trying to attack you is the biggest thing.
I-9 still make me think of Carl Zucker. I see a lot of people in this room know who that is. Little shout out to Carl. Anyway.
I think it would be good to talk about arbitration agreements, because it's this big term for a time that you could use it in some places but not others. What is an arbitration agreement? What does it actually afford a company and a worker to do? What does it not do? Takers?
One?
An alternative resolution, alternative dispute resolution.
Thank you, David.
We call it arbitration agreements, and workers have rights. And even if a worker signs an arbitration agreement, they still have the right to exercise those rights as an individual. But if the parties agree to executing an arbitration agreement, it just means that the superpower, the nuke of one person class actionizing against a company is an option that's no longer on the table. And through like the last series of labor renegotiations, AICP has been successful as collective bargaining partner in making that a part of the agreement, which just makes it more attractive makes an employer feel a little safer producing in the jurisdiction, and an employer always had the right to have a non-union person sign an arbitration agreement as a condition of employment. Thanks, Anna. But again, all the onboarding, all the offboarding, I call it zany zanes. It's not like you hire someone and they work for you for 3 years in the factory. So it is hard, but I think one of the most important things that I've remembered to put at the forefront is it doesn't mean that the employees don't have rights anymore. What was the question?
I think
that was the question.
I think that's the tricky thing, though, because people see an arbitration agreement, and I've literally had a crew member going, "You're asking me to sign my rights away." I'm like, "No, I'm not. If I am at fault, you can still come after me.
Right.
I'm just trying to not have this huge class action hanging over my head." And the truth of the matter is, we're not the only industry that is. I mean, I literally signed an arbitration agreement at my dentist's office. Like that's where we are in this country. It was in California, which is very litigious. But it is overall where we are in this country.
In California, if you're paid late as an employee, you're owed your wages for every single day paid late. With an arbitration agreement, you then have to go to the employer, and that has to be worked out. In Wrapbook, what we see is this is now the default. You put in your start packet when someone onboards, there's an arbitration agreement. This builds armor because then if that van driver that Andrew made best efforts for, please fill out your paperwork, please fill out your start work, please submit your time card, and then they don't, maybe unintentionally, maybe intentionally, then if there's an arbitration agreement, a lawyer can't go to them and weaponize that one person against the last 3 years of history at that company. That worker can still be paid out everything that they're owed. So it doesn't diminish the right of the worker to receive what they're owed. It does reduce the opportunity for that worker to be weaponized against the company. And
Yeah, and just to tie back to your question about who is it good for or who is it bad for, I think the fact that the unions, that the labor organizations have agreed to make it part of the agreement is because they want to help create an environment where there is more work opportunity for their members. And the writing's on the wall. Like, the amount of work that's gone out of the country has never been higher, and it kind of sucks. And it's not good for our culture, it's not good for our standing. I have conversations with Scott Taylor once a week about some other cornerstone company that's part of the infrastructure, the fabric of US production in New York or LA, most commonly are closing. And it's like, we gotta stop the erosion. And this is just a part of it.
Definitely. I want to bring this to the finance angle. We have this goal of pay people on time. And Chris, what % of a budget might a production company get paid up front?
Like 50% to 75.
And then what are you being mindful of when you receive that money?
So, yeah, what I wanted to say earlier was that your payroll company is really your most important vendor because, like, you have one camera house, you have one payroll company, but that payroll company is paying 100 crew members. So you have to manage your cash flow from a finance point of view. If you only got 50% from the client, you need to pay for your art build, and you need to dole out some petty cash and lock in some permits, but you need to put money aside for your payroll because there's the whole part we've been talking about people doing their time cards on time and processing, but then you also have to pay your payroll company so they can release the funds, release the checks. So that's just a back end sort of piece.
Yeah, so I hear you saying make sure you prioritize the money going to employees because that's the liability.
But like in a typical budget, like half your budget is your payroll. So if you just have to manage your money and make sure that you're keeping in mind that your payroll company is like your most important, really, because it really represents a lot of people that you're paying. And you also, you work with Wrapbook or another payroll company, and you want to have the reputation of being somebody who pays on time, because then you can have a little bit of leniency if you do have a client paying you late. You just want to build that relationship. I think that's important as well.
Absolutely. So we've heard pay people on time. If there's one late person or one time card to fix, take them out of the batch, pay them. We've heard consider providing a stipend for cell phones. We've heard consider arbitration agreements. If you're the employer, you can tell them what to do and how to do it. Are there other things that you all think of where it's like you have a production, maybe you have multiple productions in the same week? Like, how do you operationalize just reducing all these corners? How do you know if you're doing a good job or not?
I mean, so we have a couple of safeguards. I mean, one, it's to start with a really solid workflow and make sure that your production team is following that guideline. I mean, one of the things is we have separate startups. So we have like an accounting startup, and then they have a startup with me, which is a production startup. And I have a production checklist that goes from prep to shoot to wrap that talks about different things that are current issues that we're facing or issues that I've seen on previous jobs that I want to make sure that we're correcting. One of which, for example, was the automatic onboarding as soon as a booking happens. I feel like, when I was a production supervisor, it was just the paper time card. So you would just hand it to them on set. Maybe you would email them if they were, or there would maybe be a deal memo, but now it is an automatic thing. And to go back to what Andrew said earlier about normalization, like normalizing something, it just takes habit. So if you continue having them do it over and over again, even if at the first time they're like, this is so, like, what, it takes me away from my email or whatever. I've heard so many excuses of why they aren't onboarding them right away. But after a while with the same teams, it just becomes the normal thing. And it becomes easier and easier as long as they're doing it.
It's just so much easier. Like I also, like Andrew, like would walk around in the old days with a stack of deal memos and time cards and like literally chase people and like chase a grip into the parking lot. It's like, hey, before you drive home, I need you to do your deal memo. And now it's all digital. And it's all with Wrapbook, it's like all in there, and like you can just remind people to check their email. You can call them, you can text them. You don't have to literally physically be like stand there with a pen. So it's all the stuff is there for you.
It's digital and it's time-stamped, so like
It's
you have the
trackable.
receipts. So if you find yourself in the unfortunate position of having to defend yourself, you actually can, but the arbitration agreement, all the tech, all the policies, all the enforcement, it's all about making our part of the jungle a less fruitful hunting ground. So anyone can call me anytime. Like not everybody has a massive employee roster or heads of production. Like there are a lot of small companies who aren't based in California or New York, where we have roundtables and all these things. But the overall reduction of attractiveness to the lawyers is going to help everyone.
Yeah. I mean, I recently did an audit because we're going through another suit. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. We're going through an active suit, so I had to do an audit of previous work of all of these old payroll records. And I will say, since moving to a digital payroll system that is trackable, the last 2 years was like a breeze of like finding the data that I needed to find. Especially, and again, I feel like we talk about arbitration agreements a lot, but that was it. It was just there. Everything was signed because they can't move on, right? In a digital payroll system, you can't move on to the next step. You can't submit your payroll without doing all of the things that we've asked you to. So I'm able to create a packet specifically for California per non-union, all the different unions, depending on the NDAs, et cetera, as well for third-party markets, as well as New York, because all of the rules are always different. And being able to kind of do that ahead of time takes the guesswork away from my production teams as well. They can just kind of move it in and it's done.
One of the things that happens in a lawsuit is you see all the data for 3 years and you're like, oh, this is what happened in Q1 of this year. This many people were paid late. One of the things that we've started to do is to act as an audit committee in a way for production companies. And we audit their records and we share with them, like, here's how you've been performing. And we see who's best in class. And Andrew, I'm wondering if you would share, like,
Yeah.
when we audited you.
I did not like what I saw. But I saw the pattern, right? It's like, I knew something about that job, and there was something about that job and what I knew about it that made sense to me, that had less pleasurable data than another job. And there was a department internally at SMUGGLER where I was like, oh, I know who's responsible for that. And then I got to target it and speak to that person and figure out how to help that person get it done more timely. I mean, don't be afraid to look at your company and have an honest, like, look in the mirror about, like, what are we rolling the dice on? Because, like, just hoping and praying that you're not going to have a legal issue is not enough.
I think one of the things, like, you kind of mentioned, like, that this business or these rules weren't built for our business, it's built for factories and office workers. Like, if you work in an office, at least in California, and you get laid off, you get your pay and your vacation payout, everything, your last pay on your last day. I know that because in finance, we prep those payments sometimes. But that's not, but everybody on set, like, their last day of shooting is their last day. And it's not physically possible to pay them. You don't know their overtime. And that's why we do have to have these payroll schedules. And, like, no, we can't literally pay you on your last day because this is not a normal job where you got laid off after 10 years and, like, here's your last paycheck. But we do have to pay as quick as possible.
I think one thing that really stands out to me about everything the three of you are saying is there's an operational, just continuous improvement. Maybe if we leave the audience with one piece of advice, and then we'll switch to Q&A. What's one piece of advice you have for a head of production on their next set? What should they do?
Me first? Okay. Well, we've been talking a lot about building your armor, but, like, build your armor and actually wear it. So a lot of people build things and then they don't make sure that it's constantly compliant. So, or continuously make sure that it's actually being put together. So I would say you should start with arbitration agreements, and you should also build a set of guidelines. The AICP West Board, along with the National Board, actually put together a best practices. It's based off of California labor law, but it can be amended to fit. This is the QR code to that part of the website. But you could, it's open source too. The goal of these documents was to make sure that our industry in general got better about putting together these guidelines in front of the crew, because if they also don't see it and acknowledge that they've seen it, the lawyer can just say you didn't have that guideline. So you have to make sure that people are actually acknowledging receipt of it, and having that in a digital payroll system is one way to start.
Maybe something to just call out about this. I think in these times, people are all running a company and they're wondering where they should spend their money. The AICP membership dues actually go towards building things like this. So this wasn't like a one person volunteer to go do something. This was hire people who have very specific knowledge about employment law in California, in New York, hire people who understand production, put together a packet to protect you all from these corner cases that get weaponized against the company. So if you haven't checked this out, I would really check it out. And this is where our money goes to as members.
And just to put a button on it, you click on it, you download it, you just put it in your start paperwork, assuming in 2026 your payroll has digital onboarding. Like, it's done, it's been created for you. You just, like, replace all the name of your company. It's that easy. Yeah.
Cool. Closing.
Chris, yeah.
Yeah.
Piece of advice for the next set.
My when PAs would ask my older brother for advice, he would just I would tell him go to the dentist, and they would be like, "Oh, I can't afford to go to the dentist." And he'd say, "Well, saving money now is just going to cost you money in the future." So it applies to compliance. Like, you didn't get to mention this, but you mentioned this earlier, was bringing on extra production manager or coordinator to help with payroll. Saving that couple of day rate of like one crew member could cost you $1 million later. So like, just don't think about saving money now. Think about what you're avoiding in the future by doing things up and timely.
I don't remember what I was going to say, but I'm just going to say again, take a hard look in the mirror and stop like patting yourself on the back that you made it through another year, you made it through another job. Like, think honestly about how to future-proof yourself from pain. I just have to say one thing. I'm still laughing because when you said you shoot by Christmas and I'm Jewish, and when I was a production manager, I worked every Christmas because there were so few people available. It was just so funny, and I remember like trying to get the payroll in on time. Mm-hmm. And everybody was gone. So yeah, Christmas is a killer.
With that, we have time for one or two questions if anyone has anything.
I'm sorry, can I just say one more?
Oh yeah, please.
Also, there's a lot of payroll and finance people in the audience. So if you have something that you want to say to the production people in the audience about how we can help ourselves, say that. All right, Denise.
You have to talk really loud or into the mic.
So you mentioned pulling the one-time card for the person that didn't fill it out properly or whatever and turn in the batch. You're still going to get tagged with the PAGA lawsuit because you have one guy that you paid late, right? Shouldn't you just pay them based on their call time?
Yeah,
And then
so-
figure out the overtime later?
So what we usually do, our policy, and again, this is getting your production team in the habit of asking you for help too, because I don't know how many times I've been like, why hasn't this person been paid? And we catch it because we compare the call sheet to all of the payroll that's been submitted. We have a rule that you have to submit payroll within 2 days from the shoot. So once those 2 days are up, I look through the payroll as well as our payroll coordinator with the call sheet to double check that everybody's been paid. And if there's one person that hasn't been paid, we pay them their guarantee. Like, as long as you have the ability to pay them, that's what the courts will want to see, right?
Right, because you've paid them on time.
Yes.
You just have to figure out, oh, it was the wrong amount. We owed them another hour of overtime or whatever based on the production report.
Yes, and to add to that, the timeline to pay people, if you pay them their straight time, you actually have an extension to pay OT. So paying according to call times and you're estimating OT, if you get OT wrong, you have an extension to actually pay OT. And you don't need a worker to agree to how much money that they owe you or that you owe them. You just have to pay them.
Thank you.
Come on, Chanel. What do you want to say? Brian.
I'm curious what that extension is.
I can follow up offline. I'm 90% sure what it is, but I've learned in this space, like saying the wrong thing, even if it's 5% chance, you're better off not saying it. So I can follow up.
Just out of curiosity, any of you or have you heard any stories of being sued from crew outside of California? I'm trying to understand how much this is a California thing versus a national thing.
I've not been sued wage and hour over a wage and hour issue outside of California yet. I'd like to never be, but I don't see any reason to not adopt these best practices, because the thing about our business is even if your headquarters is anywhere, you're going to shoot in different states with different types of people. And I also think it's interesting that as the crew experiences less opportunity for work, people get desperate, people, you never know when shit's going to go down. And it's right here and it's so easy.
And I think that's what's so interesting too, because even when you think you're compliant in another state, I found that I'm not. It's not even just about the suits. It's about safeguarding against all of these little rules And again, as long as you have a system and a workflow and guidelines, someone else will be hard pressed to say, no, your norm is to not be compliant. Whereas like, if you have all of these guidelines and you're putting it in front of people, the norm is that we are compliant. And when we're not, that's the exception to the rule.
I encourage everyone here, if you see someone and you have a question, I'd ask and I'd chat about this. I think one of the things about this is that it's an industry-wide thing. And to the extent that everybody builds their armor and wears it, we really just decrease the incentives for people to keep coming after the same things. And it'll be an iterative thing. Like we'll plug one hole, they'll find a different hole to try to come in at. And it's really about all of us just iterating on this posture of compliance together. I really want to thank the three of you for spending your time and sharing out your insights. And we have an exciting AirPod 4 to hand out for those of you who have, let's see, who wins? I don't know. Ooh. Look at that. People's names are up.
Oh my
Who
God,
is
that's
going to get it?
amazing.
Do I click? Does someone else click? I click. Let's see.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Laura! Congratulations on your AirPod 4. And with that, that ends the...
No more Christmas.
We like Christmas. Thank you.